and welcome back to the Way to Native Chronicles. I have a video today to answer some questions that have recently been raised. It's regarding a video I produced earlier about how to get an authorization to carry permit. And this has to do in a Canadian context. There appears to be a lot of uncertainty about how this law works and under what conditions you can get a permit like that. Actually, a lot of Canadians aren't even aware that you can get such a permit, so it's a bit of a surprise to some of them. And hearing about it, it piques the interest of people because a lot of us are very fond of shooting our handguns, and one of the downsides is that it's kind of like, well, what's the use of it? You gain all these skills using the handgun, and you can't really use it for anything. So what this video is going to do is going to try to answer some of the questions that people may have. As I said, I posted a video previously on the subject, and that covered a lot of ground. It went over it fairly in depth on, especially on the aspects of how to prepare for a proof of proficiency test that you have to pass in order to get an authorization to carry. The result of that video was a lot of people were very interested and asking questions, under what conditions can you get a permit like this. The name of that video was How to Obtain an Authorization to Carry in Canada. So I'll have a link to that. It should be in the recommended videos on the top right hand corner of this video, and also at the end of this video there'll be some links to it if you want to take a look at that and haven't seen it already. But this video here, what I did is I taken down the questions that I've received, and as I've said in all my videos, feel free to ask questions. That's what I like to see. And then we can deal with subjects that people are actually interested in, and this is definitely one of them. So let me just start off by stating a caveat, saying very clearly and unambiguously that I am not a legal expert, and everything that I offer in this video is to the best of my knowledge, but do not take my word as gospel. Do your own research to be sure of these things. Contact your CFO if necessary. Even see a lawyer if you need to, because you want to be sure about a lot of these things. There are severe penalties for misunderstanding the laws regarding handguns and restricted firearms in particular. So let's make sure that we do our own homework on this. Don't just rely on me. But what I'm going to give you is to the best of my knowledge, and I have gone through this process, so I have some awareness of it. I should also add that what I'm going to be talking about is in the Alberta context. I think there are some variations from province to province, and that depends quite a bit on who the CFO is for your area. So what may be the case in Alberta may not be the case in, let's say, Ontario. So all I can do is provide you with what I understand to be the situation in Alberta. Let's see, so I guess, I should also add that in case there are some errors that I make in this video, it's hard to go back on YouTube and correct them. So check out the description for this video down below. And if there are some important corrections that people have pointed out to me and I find out that I am wrong, I'll edit that description and I'll make the corrections there, okay? So let's start. One of the first questions are, how many of these authorization to carry permits are there in Canada? Let me just make sure that everybody's on the same page here. Authorization to carry is the authorization to carry a handgun, and it's usually in the case of the bush. And this video is going to deal with carrying a handgun in the bush for protection, either for protection or for dispatching animals that are trapped. Okay, so there are other authorizations to carry, bank guards and armored truck guards, policemen, wildlife enforcement officers. People like that also have authorizations, but we're not dealing with that here. We're dealing with just a common man and the authorization to carry permits that such people can obtain. So let's get started with that. And when I say how many ATCs or authorizations to carry there are in Canada. The best research I can get and most recent numbers is 224. So it's not a whole lot, but it's not nothing either. And I run into people here in Alberta that have authorizations to carry all the time. I think some of them are guides, hunting guides, but I think the vast majority are trappers. But there are other occupations too. Even a wildlife photographer can, if they can show they need it. You know, they're sitting out in the bush making calls to bring in predators. They kind of need a handgun too, and if they can show that, they can get an authorization as well. So let's go on to the next question. What kinds of ATCs are there? I'm going to call Authorization to Carry ATC in this video, okay? There are two kinds for the purposes of this video. There is one that is for the protection of yourself from wildlife, like to protect against attacks by large animals like bears, cougars, that sort of thing. In a case like that, then we're looking at handguns that are at least a .357 Magnum and usually larger. I think 44 Magnum is pretty par for the course in this type of need. Then there's a second class, and that's an authorization to carry for dispatching animals. This is intended primarily for trappers, in fact, I guess solely for trappers, and it involves using a .22 caliber handgun as a rule. You have to use a .22 because trappers don't want to blow an animal to smithereens. So there are those two categories, protection and dispatch, and there are slightly different requirements for the two, although they're very similar in many respects. Okay, let's see. Let's go on to the third question. Outside of defense against humans, what are the prerequisites for getting an ATC? This is one of the key questions to this whole matter that people have when they first encounter the subject. And although I think there's maybe one person in all of Canada that has an authorization to carry for the purpose of protecting himself. I'm not going to go into details on that. You know, people deserve their privacy, but there's a good reason for it, from what I've heard. Aside from that, forget it. You know, all authorizations to carry are for protection against animals, and in fact, you know, as someone who works behind the gun counter, I'm quite aware of the fact that we should not be selling firearms to people to protect themselves from other people, like thieves and things like that. I know things go on, there's stuff in the news, but really when it comes down to it, you're not actually allowed to buy firearms anyways, not even long rifles, to protect yourself from people. And if you tell a CFO that, they'll just say, no, you can't have it. And that, of course, then applies to handguns. So the prerequisite for an ATC is to protect yourself against animals. And I'm going to focus mainly on the ATC for wildlife protection, even though we know there's also one for dispatch of animals. When it comes to, well, I'll cover some of the other stuff in some of the questions that follow. We'll get to it point by point. The fourth question is, what are the restrictions on the ATCs that are given out? This is kind of interesting because many people are intrigued by getting an ATC, but you have to be aware that it's not just like an open book. Here's a list of restrictions. When you have a handgun, if you're on a Skidoo or on an ATV or any motorized vehicle, you have to have that gun with a trigger lock on it and in a locked container. So let's say if you're a trapper and you're running your trap line using a Skidoo legally, you have to put a trigger lock on the handgun, put it in a lockbox on your Skidoo, go run around, you stop at your traps, then you get off your snowmobile and you're going to do some stomping around the bush, check a trap or two or whatever, and At that time, you can take the gun out of the locked box and put it in your holster. Okay, so you can't just hop on the skidoo with this with a handgun on your hip. The second condition is that the handgun has to be worn on your side. There's no putting the handgun in a shoulder holster. And I've dealt with that in the previous video. It's quite a bit due to a safety consideration, but also it's related to the third point here, that the handgun, when you're carrying it, has to be always visible. It has to be worn on the outside of your clothing. That includes if you're wearing a parka too. So you know, you've got to get that handgun. The belt has to go around your parka, so it's always on the outside. It can never be concealed when you're wearing it. The handgun also has to be held in with a clasp of some sort, so it's retained in the holster. So when can you use the handgun? You can only use it when you are actually working. So I would think that just sitting around the campfire at night, I don't think you're legally allowed to have the handgun in your holster. You have to be actively engaged in work. How that's defined, I'm not quite sure. You might want to consult a lawyer or talk to the CFO about that. But it is to be used while you're actually in that occupation that you've obtained the ATC for. Another point is you can't discharge that firearm for any other purpose than, let's say, dispatching animals in the case of a .22, or protecting yourself against an attacking animal. So this is ruling out taking your handgun out to the bush and doing some target practice. Not legal, sorry. Another point for restriction is, and I've got my whole list here, you know, it has to be used on a registered fur management area on a trapline that is classified as a registered fur management area. This is not the type of trapping that occurs on private land where you get permission from an owner to trap beavers, let's say, on their land or things like that. ATCs are not issued for that type of trapping, for private land trapping. They are issued to trappers who own a trapline, or either own a trapline or are junior partners on a trapline. So you'd be a senior partner if you own the trapline, or senior trapper, and a senior trapper can also designate junior trappers. If you're a junior trapper, you could apply for an ATC and obtain one if you satisfy all the conditions. So that is quite a restriction on a large number of people who are going to be watching this, because I'll go into it a little bit further later, but registered fur management area is not the easiest thing to get. Okay, let's go on to the next common question. What is the most common authorization to carry? I think I've answered that. It's trapping. Who can trap? So this may be, now that we're talking about this stuff, now you're maybe getting questions in your mind. Say, okay, well, really, I never really thought about trapping. You know, how hard is it to get into trapping? Anyways, because a lot of people don't have any exposure at all to trapping. It's a big part of Canadian history, but with the fur prices, trapping has become less of a popular industry, and you don't really hear much about it. So let me just give you a brief overview here. At least in Alberta, if you want to become a trapper, if you want to get a trapper's license, which is what you require to become a junior trapper or a senior trapper on a registered fur management area, or to trap on private land too, for that matter. In Alberta, at least now, you have to take the trapper's course if you aren't already registered as a trapper. So the trapper's course is like, I think it's about a 3-day course, costs a few bucks to take, and it's a really good course here in Alberta we have. So trappers are very interested in maintaining their image and making sure that everybody's out there is working and pulling in the same direction, you know, keeping a good name for trappers. There's a lot of stuff to learn. And then, in addition to what I said, you know, you have to be a senior or a junior trapper on a registered fur management area. I'm just going to start calling that the RFMA, Registered Fur Management Area. So let's go on to another question here. How hard is it to get into trapping? Kind of hinted at this before, and I'm talking about Alberta. I'm not sure what the situation is in other provinces, but it's quite difficult. And I don't want to get into all the politics of it, but I mean, just to give you sort of a skim view, our First Nations people have been struggling a lot to maintain their culture and their way of life. And one of the pushes in that area has been to make sure, or really try hard, to keep the trap lines in Indigenous hands. And I think that even applies to ones that are not currently in Indigenous hands, that are attempting to be sold. They will even look, I think, in the history of that trap line, see where it was, who it belonged to before that and stuff. And the long and short of this story, I'm sorry to say to you who are not Indigenous, is that it's really, I guess, sort of next to impossible to get a trap line nowadays if you're not Indigenous. So that's quite an obstacle there. Let's see what else. But trap lines do come up for sale occasionally. And what happens is, I mean, the person who owns the trap line, they can put the trap line up for sale, but that does not necessarily mean that it's going to go through. It's not just their say. These things are dispositions. They're granted by the government, and the representatives of Indigenous treaties will have a say in these things. So just be aware of that. It's kind of a tough push. So it's maybe sorry, that's a bit of a downer for some people, but that is the way it is. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on to the next question. What rights do you get with a trap line? People wonder about that too. When you obtain a trap line, and now we're just talking about obtaining one. I mean, what I said before is kind of, like I said, that's a bit of a downer as far as getting a trap line, but that does not prevent you at all from becoming a junior partner on a trap line. Okay, so if you really want to get into trapping, and you're not Indigenous, there is still a pretty wide door open. You can become a junior trapper, okay? And there are a lot of trap lines, a whole lot of trap lines that are not active. They're not being actively trapped. So really, I don't think that would be all that much of a difficulty to get on as a junior trapper if this is what you want to do. So take heart in that, okay? So where was I? Yeah, for the person who gets a trap line, what do they get? And what they get is called a disposition. And a disposition means that you are given the rights to harvest the fur-bearing animals within that area that defines the RFMA. And you have, in addition to that, you have the right to build 3 cabins, and I'm talking Alberta, may vary in other places, 3 cabins, and have your traps set. And your cabin and your traps are protected by law. So you can go and build yourself a cabin. It can only be up to a certain size, 3 of them, and know that it's legally protected. No one is allowed to mess with your stuff. So when we talk about dispositions, to understand it better, a disposition is just like what the logging companies get when they harvest trees. They get a disposition for a section of land to harvest the trees. They don't own the land, they don't buy it, they get a disposition to it. And in fact, a disposition can be given for logging in the same area that a disposition has been given for trapping, just so you know that. From what I'm told, if if an oil company goes through your Trapline, then they would have to pay you. But this is just what I hear. Okay, so let's see what else. You're permitted to build trapping cabins. That's a big thing. You're protected. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. What are the handgun requirements? Generally, the handgun requirement for protection is 357 Magnum at a minimum. And from there, you have to then pass a proof of proficiency test. And that test has to be administered by a recognized examiner. This is kind of new in Alberta, if I'm correct. This has been a recent change. So it used to be that buddy can test buddy, and then you say, okay, yeah, you passed, but now it's got to be an actual examiner. And so I think the result will be that it gets stricter. One obvious result is that it's going to cost money to take the test too, because your buddy would do it for free, right? So you're going to have to pay, you know, it can cost a couple $100 to have an examiner do a test like that for you. So you better hope you pass it. It's a very strict test, very well defined in what you have to do. And I'll go into what is involved in that. When you do pass the test and you get an ATC, that ATC is good for 1 year, and at least in Alberta. And then the following year you can apply for it again. If you go for a second year, then you will get an ATC for 2 years. So then you don't have to go through the application process again for 2 years. So just be aware of that. There's a fair bit of paperwork involved. And yeah, in that part of that paperwork, you have to show that you've done research on the area, knowing what kind of animals are there, and if there, if there's cougars there, if there's grizzly bears there, you have to know that should involve contacting a wildlife biologist for the area, getting their input, and making a record of having done that research. You'll have to fill out the paperwork that asks you a lot of questions about how you're going to be conducting your trapping, why you need the handgun. So they're really interested in making sure there's no phony applications. They want to know that you're serious about it and that you know what you're doing and understand the whole situation. Particularly wondering why you think a handgun will even help you. That is really what a lot of it comes down to. So, okay, now, I should mention too that the telephone interview will probably be involved too. So I'll speak to you one-on-one. But the law does provide for the ATCs, so I don't want to make this sound too daunting. If you satisfy the requirements, you're going to get the ATC. Don't worry about that. Okay. Just make sure you follow all the steps and don't do anything wrong. Just trust that the law will be followed. Okay, so let's move on to another one. Here's a question. Can an ATC be issued for protection while hunting or other outdoor pursuits? That's an interesting one, eh? So you might think, well, once I get an ATC, I can take it with me when I'm fishing, okay, in that area, in that RFMA, or hunting and stuff like that, but the answer to that is no, you can't. It is very narrowly defined. It's to be used only when you're in the act of doing that work that you've applied for. So you have to be trapping. Now, exactly how that gets defined, I mean, make up your mind for yourself. I mean, contact the CFO if you need a clearer definition, but it has to be while you are actually involved in that work, that occupation that you receive the ATC for. Let's see, and as I mentioned before, you have to be aware of the laws regarding the motorized vehicle how you have to store the gun when you're in one. I don't think this is just probably just a carryover from the general law already in effect as far as transporting restricted firearms, right? It's not. I don't think politicians have spent and lawmakers have spent a whole lot of time on this, on making these laws, let's say, reasonable. If I understand it right, maybe if you're using a dog sled team, it's okay, to keep the gun in your holster, or maybe on a non-motorized boat like a canoe. So we want to look into that. But if you're in a motorized boat, I think then you better have that gun in a lockbox with a trigger lock on it for sure. Okay, we're almost near the end here. I've got a question about, can you use reloaded ammunition for the test? And as I'm going to explain a little bit later, after this, you got to fire a lot of ammunition to pass this proof of proficiency test. Let me tell you, it's a lot of ammo. And you're talking 44 Magnum. It's about $50, say, for a box of 50 rounds, right? So let's see what you have to do in the proof of proficiency course. So you have to do 3 rounds. You have to fire 3 different distances, 6 shots at 3 different distances. So that's 18 shots. And that's from a standing position. Then you have to do 3 sets of 6 shots from a kneeling position. So now you're talking 36 rounds. There's just about $50 worth of ammo. And if you're taking the test, you are actually allowed 3 shots at 3 tries. So the maximum would be 36 times 3. So we're talking like right around 100, over 100 rounds to as a worst case scenario that you better have with you when you take a test. So let's am I right there? 3 times. No, 3 times. Yeah, that's well over 100 rounds that you got to have just with you for the test. And then you take in your practice sessions and building up your skills. Store-bought ammo is pretty expensive, but if you reload it, you can save yourself a lot of money. So the question comes up, can you use reloaded ammo? I've actually looked into that myself, and again, it may depend on the CFO that you deal with, but the answer I got back is yes, so long as it's full power. And you don't think you can get away with loading up some powder puff loads so that you can shoot more accurate and just go poop, poop, poop without much recoil. They better be full house loads. They have to be the same loads that you will be using in the bush for protection. So having said that, you can use cast bullets. At least that's the answer I was given. Cast bullets really reduce your cost of ammunition. I think I can make a box of 50 rounds using wheel weight metal for about $5. So that makes the whole endeavor of practicing with 44 Magnum much more feasible. You got to shoot a handgun a lot to get good with it, and this is not a super easy test to pass. Don't be deceived on that point. We're going to get into that a little bit pretty soon here. So let's see, what's another question here? What is the proof of proficiency test like, at least in Alberta? Because it probably does vary, I'm not sure. So for the protection class, when you're applying to get an ATC for protection against wildlife with the large caliber handguns, you are given, you have to stand there with the gun in your holster, and they're going to let off a beep, and when you hear that beep, you have to unlatch your gun from the holster. You have to draw it, and you have to shoot at the target 6 shots. Okay, you have to shoot at the target at 3 different distances. So 6 shots at one closer distance, then you do it all over again, 6 shots, do it all over again, and then at the furthest target, which is going to be 46 feet away. But the trick is, each time you do it, your 6 shots have to be fired in 20 seconds. That is from the time you hear the beep, okay? So beep, draw the gun, boom, 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 and your last shot better be done within 20 seconds. It's not super difficult, but it definitely does take some practice. And this test requires you to hit a target within an 18-inch circle of the target, which is pretty liberal, but when you're getting out to nearly 50 feet, that's not something that just anybody walking out the street can do, especially when you're shooting fast. Okay, so try that out for yourself. Even if you're not ever going to get an ATC, it's really fun practice. It's a practice for me, taking it to a whole new level. I just enjoy the heck out of it, to be honest. Plus, there's the other side effect of that is once you do get an ATC, if your shooting range is a little bit kind of iffy about letting people use holsters on their range, if you have an authorization to carry, you actually have some sort of documentation, some actual bona fide course that you've passed. There's not a whole lot of those for revolvers, right? So if you have an ATC, then that may make the difference on whether you can use your handgun from a holster at their range, because you have some proof of training and having passed the course. So that's a little bit of a side benefit. That's a bit of a benefit there. So let's take a look at some of the other conditions of that test. The other one is, I described those 36 shots. You have to do it again, another 36 shots, 6 shots, 6 shots, 6 shots, 36, 18, okay. You have to do it from a standing position first, 6 shots, a total of 18, keeping them in that 9-inch diameter bullseye. Then you have to do it over again, every time being timed by 20 seconds from a kneeling position, 6 shots, 6 shots, 6 shots, okay? I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's kind of confusing. Now, if you were applying for an ATC for using 22 handgun to dispatch animals, the distances are closer. I think it's 5, 10, and 15 meters for the 3 distances, and you have to get all your I'm always saying all your shots. Actually, it's 85% of your shots, I believe, have to be within a 4-inch diameter circle. In the case of the protection one, 85% of your shots within an 18-inch diameter circle. So sorry for exaggerating that, but it's still a pretty high standard. Okay, for dispatch and demonstrate. Oh, one final thing I'll mention here too is when you're doing this, doing the proof of proficiency exam, one of the key things and something that will fail you instantly is if you use improper holster technique as far as safety goes. And if you've received no training in holster use, you probably have no idea what you're doing wrong. And so if you want to, before going out and trying to take this test, I strongly recommend you take a holster course from a qualified instructor before starting out, and then practice at it, practice, dry fire for a couple of weeks before you take the exam, because you got to get that muscle memory built in. And any slip up on the safety front, that's it. You're probably finished as far as the exam goes, and you won't get your ATC. So I think I've covered everything that I've heard of so far for questions on this, and maybe there's some others. You can post them in the comments below. I'm always glad to hear from you, and I appreciate you subscribing as well. You can also click there's a bell on YouTube on this page that will give you notifications whenever new videos come out. I'm really trying to get one new video out per week. There's just so much to cover, and shooting is a very enjoyable sport. On this channel we do reloading, we do hunting, we do trapping, and we cover bullet casting, a lot of stuff to cover. So just let me know what you're interested in, okay? And until next time, this is the Way to Native Chronicles, and thank you for watching.